welcome to video number 2 of a 5-part series.
And through the law of attraction, you are magnetizing and attracting the vibrational frequency you are sending out to the universe. You may be wondering, what is a supermoon and what is a blue moon? A supermoon exceeds the disk size of any average size full moon by up to 8%, and the brightness of an average size full moon by some 16%, according to the Farmer's Almanac. Now, you may not perceive the difference in size, but a supermoon will appear brighter in the sky. A supermoon also refers to a full moon with the moon's closest approach to Earth in its elliptical orbit. It appears larger and brighter than a regular full moon because it is closer to the Earth. The term supermoon was coined by astrologer Richard Noel in 1979. Now, some people believe that supermoons can have heightened energetic impact on Earth, causing increased emotions and enhanced spiritual energies. An element of the algorithm, which is the LOUE plus B plus V plus F plus A equals M, is the B is believe. Believe is the key word here. What you perceive is your reality. Change your perception. Turn it right side up, turn it upside down, turn it sideways. Change your reality. I have realized through tons of research that you cannot change anything in your reality 3D life until you change your perception and start to believe in your own thoughts, words, and actions. And this is the vibrational frequency you are sending out. So, why is this important, our vibrational frequency? Another element of the algorithm for manifesting a desired outcome. One of the 5 laws that we tap into in the algorithm, and there are many. Some say 12, some say over 20, some say over 80. But I only use 5 of the fundamental laws that govern our universal energy. The energy we receive and transmute and transform to create what we want in our lives, not by accident, but by design. The law of vibration states that everything in the universe is in a constant state of movement. We refer to these movements as vibration. And the speed or rate at which something vibrates is called its frequency. The only difference between one object and another is the rate of its vibration. This law states that everything in the universe is in constant motion, vibrating at its own particular frequency. Even our thoughts, emotions, beliefs vibrate at their own frequency. We know our thoughts create emotions, and according to the vibrational frequency chart, each emotion is connected with a certain frequency. Here is a little visual. The emotional vibrational frequency chart shows you the emotions that are here, such as enlightenment, peace, compassion, love, joy, reason, acceptance, willingness, neutrality, courage, pride. And as you get further down, you see shame, guilt, apathy, grief, and fear. Now, this is the frequency that these emotions are vibrating at. To tap into the law of attraction, the law of gratitude, you want to be in the frequency of 500 and above. In order for you to open up your heart chakra, these are your 3 lower chakras. This is your heart chakra. So you want to open up your heart chakra, and this will open you up to the knowledge of the universe. If you are following this train of thoughts, thoughts create emotions. Different emotions carry with them different frequencies. Our emotions are tied to our aura or auric field. Wow, so much to know. Everything is explained in detail in the video I created. Look to the top right. If our emotions can sometimes be a problem because this works whether you realize this or not realize this, or what I refer to is intend or not intend, and it just happens that way. The thought forms that you are creating and the vibrations create the frequency you are sending out to the universe. Your thought forms are also what you create the image or visualize the desired outcome, your goals, dreams, or intentions. Now, this can lead to all new questions, and the best answer I have is get in touch with your own soul. The wisdom is hidden inside of you as part of your essence or your soul. So now that can lead to other questions such as, how do I control my frequency? How do I send out the right tune that I want to manifest back into my life? How do I control my thoughts, control my emotions, control my frequency? That is the answer. Yes, I know it sounds like this is a lot of work, and it's not easy to do, but with practice it will become second nature when you realize you are creating your own reality. Everything that has happened in your life has happened because of an original cause. This again is part of the law of cause and effect and cause. And this is a law that we are living in every minute, every second of our life. And this is what builds our world. So the next thing you may be wondering is, what is cosmic energy versus my own energy? Cosmic energy is believed to be a universal life force energy that permeates everything in the universe. And it is also seen as a source of spiritual energy, vitality, and consciousness. Through the law of one, where the universe is interconnected, and through the subtle energy systems and chakras of the body, the vibrations influence our reality and what we choose to manifest into our life. In other words, your thoughts are powerful, and through the law of attraction, you are magnetizing and attracting the vibrational frequency you are sending out to the universe. And this is another algorithm, another element of the algorithm, the law of attraction. So you start with good thoughts, leads to good intentions, and good actions. What you think you are, the universe is receiving this frequency from you. You are what you think. Through the law of cause and effect, we are creating a new cause with our intentions, whether we realize this or not. We are not just for this meditation, but for every second and minute of our life. Wow, this is amazing. Then this is way too much to try to wrap your mind around unless you raise your level of conscious awareness and allow yourself to have unlimited thinking potential and draw the experiences you would like to manifest into your life. We also need to make sure our chakras are open and aligned and clear, doing their job of taking in the prana or universal energy. This is our breathing. And this is where the pranayama breathing comes into play, as well, making sure ourselves and our space is clear of negative energies. Otherwise, we are breathing in these energies. Look to the top right hand corner and find the video, The Secrets of the Seven Chakras and the Auric Field Energies in Guided Meditations. We also need to prepare ourselves and our chakras for receiving this energy and transmuting and transforming the energy through our aura or auric field. Now, what does the aura or auric field have to do with receiving, transmuting, and transforming the energy? And this does not mean the energy we feel or the energy in our physical body, that the physical laws dictate to us. Now we are learning about other energies we live in and other laws that govern over the universe. Now, people call this subtle energy that is around us an aura, but it is actually called an auric field, and it contains the seven energy subtle energy bodies that are surrounding us at all time. If you want more information about this, I have a video. Look to the top right. It's Uncovering Hidden Knowledge, Harness the Power of Your Auric Field. So you may be wondering, why do I need to know this information? I am here because I want to do a meditation and harness the energy of the blue moon. Well, the reason is we are working with energy. We will be receiving, transmuting, and transforming this energy to manifest something into our life. Now, this sounds very complicated, I know, but having knowledge, not just about what we think as energy what we are mostly taught all our life, but opening our mind and listening to the wisdom that is hidden deep inside of us, something that our soul knows, that our ego doesn't.
Thank you for watching. To be continued in video number 3.